All right, good morning. My name is Dr. David Eisenbach, and I teach media and politics here at Columbia University. I thought it would be interesting for us, instead of having this book event in a bookstore somewhere, if we could do it in a classroom with my students as well as other members of the student body, because I believe that the problem of the media and politics and the failure of the media to really cover our political life properly is a problem that is going to be with us for a very long time. Could you get the lights over here? It's certainly going to outlast the Bush administration. And I am a firm believer as a historian and a teacher that in order for us to avoid the mistakes of the past, we have to learn from history. And that is why Senator Mike Gravel and I collaborated on this book, The Kingmakers, How the Media Threatens Our Security and Our Democracy, because we want to educate the public to know the pitfalls and the failures that have occurred since 9/11, whether it was on Iraq, Iran, or our current election in 2008, and how to watch out for them so that we don't get fooled again. Now, before I introduce my esteemed co-author, I'd like to say a few words about how we got into this book project. I worked for Senator Gravel as his communications director, and part of my responsibility was preparing and helping him prepare for the debates. And in our conversations in preparation for these debates, we would often comment on not only the stories of the day, but how wrong the stories were. And we began to see that it's not just on the little stories that the media has gotten it wrong. They get it wrong on the big stories, whether it was Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, or Iran's nuclear weapons program, or the inevitable Hillary Clinton. The media has been consistently and uniformly wrong. Now, how is that possible? How could they be so wrong about such important issues? Well, the answer is that there isn't a vast media conspiracy to dupe the American public into favoring war over peace or favoring certain candidates over others. The failure and the problem is a result of a systemic flaw in how the media collects information and presents it to the public as news. We see that, and we cover in this book, that when a story starts to become a big media phenomenon, it immediately starts to gather what we call a storyline or a narrative very early on. And as that narrative gets picked up by the various media organizations presenting the story, they begin to stick to it, even in the face of contradictory facts. So you have situations where the media, pushed on by the Bush administration during the lead up to the Iraq War, is just taking on face value the administration's assertions that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There were some reporters, for the Washington Post, for example, who tried to present contradictory opinions within the government. People who were saying, you know what, we're not so sure about this. But those stories got either spiked by the Washington Post or the New York Times, or were buried in the middle of the newspaper, whereas the stories supporting the idea of the weapons of mass destruction that fell in line with the storyline and narrative that the media was presenting, those got big play on the front page. And that filtered out into the political discussion that occurred in the 24-hour news cycle with the talking heads, who were constantly referring to these news items and presenting them as truth. So what you begin to see is you have what we call the echo chamber of the media, where the same falsities get repeated as truth, and then they become the common wisdom, and that in turn shapes political opinion. So that, for example, right after 9/11, 6% of the American population believed that Saddam Hussein had any connection to the 9/11 hijackers. After the administration exploited the echo chamber in the run-up during the summer of 2002 to the Iraq War resolution, 67% of the American public believed there was an al-Qaeda-Iraq connection, something that turned out to be totally false. And so you have this situation where not only do we have the farce of hundreds of millions of Americans believing stories that aren't true. And we have a news media, a multi-billion-dollar news media, that are running stories 24 hours a day, exposing Americans to news in an unprecedented amount. Americans know more news today than they had, ever, certainly as recently as 40 years ago. All right, Americans were not consuming as much news, but they are consuming false news. And that farce quickly becomes tragedy, as we saw in the case of Iraq, and as we almost saw in a quite devastating potential war with Iran. And that is one of the things that we talk about in the book. And one of the controversial assertions that we make is that the main threat to American security is not terrorism. It is the media. The media is the thing that is going to get us into these wasteful wars that jeopardize our security and continue to jeopardize it as we speak. The other controversial assertion that we make is that the main threat to our democracy is not money, as we've been told constantly by politicians or by the media itself, but it is the media. The media picks the leading candidates. They identify who are the leaders. They get the contributions. They get the poll numbers. And as a result, even before Americans start paying attention to the news, we have the front runners chosen by the American media and not the people. This will become clearer as I read from the book as we go on, but I first want to introduce my co-author, Senator Mike Gravel, who, even before I started working for him, was a hero of mine, a man who, while in the Senate, stood up to the Nixon administration and filibustered the Vietnam-era draft and single-handedly worked to end that. So many of you today who are sitting here at Columbia and not sitting in Iraq somewhere have a lot of gratitude towards the senator. And of course, he revealed the Pentagon Papers, the secret study that revealed the lies that successive administrations had been feeding the American public about the war in Vietnam. It has been an honor to work with Senator Gravel, and now I'm quite proud to call him my friend. And so please welcome Senator Mike Gravel.
Thank you, David, very much. Just as an aside, this is the first time I've seen him at Columbia with a tie on. We're both dressed up in our power outfits. We're going to be interviewed at Bloomberg, and so we got to look like we're one of them. But I don't think we'll fool them. I think they're wise to us. But David gave a very good exposition of what the book presents. Let me emphasize the importance of it. And we're both very flattered when Publishers Weekly, in the last sentence of their take on the book, said that every single American should read this book, because it is awesome in when you look at the overarching presentation of it, because we know all the facts here and there, but when you put them all together, how could this have happened to us? It's very important to realize that we have representative government. The media, the fourth estate, as an instrument, as an institution in a democracy, is just as important as the government, as representative government. One without the other does not work. And so when they both fail, we fail as a system of democracy. And I'm unfortunate to tell you, if you haven't perceived it, we have failed. Dwight Eisenhower warned us about the threat. That threat has come to pass. And you see it with the way the media handles what has gone on in the last generation, and of course what we now see with the control of the military-industrial complex of our government and our culture. I really want to stress our culture, because that's where the media comes in and buys into it. And so we've commercialized ourselves to an unbelievable degree. And so that's why we've really brought ourselves into economic bankruptcy and penury. We just don't know it, but we have, and we will begin to see that come upon us like a tidal wave as we think that there's going to bring about change. Well, the only thing I can tell you about the forthcoming change is don't hold your breath.